Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Sivanand. AI can help you as an expert consultant and also as a very dutiful intern. And in both cases, you need to continue staying in the driver's seat and having it work for you, don't work for it. On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of. Welcome back to the Convergence.fm podcast, folks. Today, we're talking about using generative AI, and is a follow-on to feedback from our last episode with Mike Gayhart. Thanks to everyone who sent us the follow-on questions, as well as the feedback and suggestions about that episode. I think there's a lot of confusion going on today about whether or not to use generative AI. And as a result of a lot of noise on the topic. And I think like most things, it seems like we are once again just polarized. Some of us think that it's the end of needing employees or colleagues and AI is the answer to everything. And others have their heads buried in the sand, hoping nothing's going to change and they don't need to change either. Like with most things binary or having extremes, or black and white thinking, as some people call it, I think there's oftentimes more nuance and there's shades of gray between the two extremes. And it's on us as individuals to zoom in deeper on the important matters, to form our own opinions on where we're at, rather than feeling like we have to choose between the two extreme options. And in order to form our own opinions, I think the easiest way is to get out there and try ourselves and learn for ourselves. And part of the reason we're doing this episode is because I continue to be surprised about how few of us are using ChatGPT or one of the other generative AI large language models on a daily basis. It's not just for the tech folks in your lives. If you use Google, I promise you are technical enough to get the benefits of generative AI, and it's a lot more helpful than Google is. Another surprise for me is that most of you who are using ChatGPT are using it for very rudimentary tasks in comparison to how powerful it really can be. So we put this on, and I'm hoping this episode will help getting you use it more, as well as for solving much harder problems that you encounter while doing it in a way that's safe and protects the privacy of your company and your data. One thing I'll say about getting the most out of something new is traversing the learning curve. There's going to be trial and error involved. And the great news is that the implications of the errors here are generally pretty low if you continue to stay in the driver's seat. We're going to talk about that a lot today, about staying in the driver's seat. I think most of the challenges that you've publicly heard of, like for example, that lawyer who cited cases from ChatGPT that weren't true as a result of hallucinations, it happened because they weren't in the driver's seat. They let the AI drive them off the metaphorical cliff. And I'm going to say, we've got to give them credit for using AI to help find citations or precedent, which is super useful in the legal field. It's also extremely time consuming to do. And any tool that helps you find something useful for way less effort is a good idea. What I didn't like is that they didn't check to see if what the AI produced was real. AI can help you find a needle in a haystack maybe, but you still need to confirm that it's the needle you were looking for. And that's what I mean by staying in the driver's seat. You've probably heard this cliche that AI isn't going to replace your job. It is someone who knows how to use AI that's going to replace your job. And this is a cliche that I've rolled my eyes at because of how often I hear it. And some of you, I'm sure, are laughing because I'm saying it myself after what I've told you about the cliche. But it's true. And so I think it's also important to think about how this can't possibly be the last thing that we invent as humans. That AI will take over, replace all of the jobs we're doing, and make humans obsolete. That might be in a very far distant future, but Until then, I prefer thinking about a future where we continue to explore and adventure and invent. And AI is going to be a super tool that helps us, helps the inventors, the creators, and builders like yourselves to someday build the next revolutionary technology like the internet was and the mobile phone was and AI has been. So I do think we have to get really good at learning new skills again, though. This was a lot easier back in the day before we turned 25. And it takes a lot more effort now to learn things like a new language or hone a new skill like playing a musical instrument, or in this case, learning to carry out our lives augmented by the power of generative AI. You may have heard this adage to fall in love with the problem and not the solution. And it's likely the product managers in your life that said it. I think, though, that thinking will come to the forefront across the board, not just amongst the product folks, a lot more. You might be good at something very specific that you're doing at your job today. And if you don't have a window into why that task or that part of the job is needed or relevant, I think now's a really good time to start asking those questions. Questions like, what problem am I solving by being really good at this thing? How can AI help solve the problem at its root in the grander scheme of things, rather than just helping you send better emails? There are three things that we prioritize in terms of what we want to talk about today. The first one is the role that AI can help you with. The expert consultant who helps you think, as well as the dutiful intern who helps you get stuff done. Those are at least two roles amongst many. The next thing is a little bit about how this tool works at a high level, the different options you have in front of you, and how to get started at forming a habit around this for yourself and also for the team or the company that you're leading. We'll also talk a bit about how to protect yourself from a privacy and security standpoint. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. The first topic is around the roles that AI can play for you in helping you. The consultant and the intern. Think about the consultant as someone who has deep knowledge in the problem space around whatever you're solving today. And they can help you exercise good judgment to make the really hard decisions where there isn't a clear answer. On the other hand, think about a really good intern who is someone that you can depend on to follow a process and respond to a really clearly stated set of requests or tasks, but whose work you need to check. So between the two, I'll start with the intern. I do think it's a little bit easier to get started. I don't want to take away from the fact that I think the consultant can be very powerful. And if I had to place my bets, I think that's where a lot more of the value sits long-term. So the dutiful intern, let's get a little bit deeper into here. This is someone that you can delegate tasks to, but you need to be really clear around the objectives and provide context and the process. And you also need to check the work before you can submit the work, whether it's an email or whatever else that you're having the intern do. And they can be helpful in a few ways. The first one is simplifying complex things or translating them. An example here is in the legal field. This could be how a paralegal assists a lawyer. At Integral, we spend a lot of money with our law firm reviewing contracts, including NDAs. And when we look at various NDAs sent our way, some of them are super easy to sign, and they had very mutual terms for both parties and are super reasonable. While others were pretty ridiculous and just a really bad idea to sign them. And as someone who wasn't a lawyer and someone who struggles to sit in one place and read these detailed documents, it's basically a different language to me. And so I had to send it out to the law firm, and depending on the paralegal that they assigned, it would cost anywhere from $100 to $400, believe it or not, to review this NDA and get it to a point where we're ready to sign it. And sometimes it took them over a week to get back to us. Now, in this new world with AI, what I do, first of all, to be safe, is I find and replace the company names or any other super identifying factors. And I just do that in Google Docs or Microsoft Words using the replace feature. And then I take this replace obfuscated abstracted document and I put it into AI. And I ask AI to highlight the risks if I were to sign the document as either party. It costs barely anything to ask. You get the answer right away. And based on what the AI comes back with, I could ask it follow-up questions. And then by the time I go to my law firm, I could put really specific requests in front of my lawyer. And I get a response much faster from them. And with the less time they spend on it, it's the less money I got to spend with the firm too. Initially, as I was gaining confidence as a system, what I did was just do both. I'd ask AI and then I'd ask the lawyer and I'd compare their answers. And I found that I paid a lot to have the paralegals simplify the legal jargon. And that part of their job wasn't very valuable. On the other hand, what was super helpful from the human lawyers compared to the AI came to being when I needed to apply judgment and make hard decisions. So the other thing that you can use it for, in addition to translating from hard language, is to summarize long documents or emails. It can even help you write or edit your documents and emails. I do have some advice, maybe a favor on this, is don't just have AI write your stuff blindly, stay in the driver's seat. We're building a very noisy world here, and I ask that you do your part as using this as a tool and staying in the driver's seat. And instead of just having it blindly write blogs for maybe your website to drive SEO based on opinions that AI forms, and spew more noise out there, instead form your own opinions that sets you apart and use the AI as an editor. I believe it's becoming increasingly apparent when folks use AI to write for them. And there's so much more defense against that, so much so that email tools are using AI to reverse summarize the email back to the original point so that it's easier to go through emails for us. So be careful not to tarnish your reputation there and stay in the driver's seat, like I'm going to keep saying. Another thing that I like using the AI intern for is to research things. I've personally struggled a lot to sift through tons of information to do inquiry. This goes all the way back to college when we were in the library, reading through papers and other things in there. And I personally am quite good at connecting dots and forming synthesis, but my weakness was in the research and surfacing the dots out of the volumes of information that were there. And today with an AI intern, I can find information much faster across the breadth. And then I reserve my focus energy on the nuggets where I want to go deeper, where I do read the article or the paper and form a deeper opinion in addition to the breadth of opinion. It's a lot easier for me now because I'm having to go deeper only on the relevant articles and papers because the AI intern is helping me find what's relevant in the first place while also giving me surface level context on the things around it. In this lens, and speaking about how we have different brains, like for example, some of my colleagues were really good at the research and I was good at the synthesis, so we formed good pairs. AI can be a really good pair for you. You can create different audience personalities for what you're writing inside of your LLM, like creating a custom GPT in ChatGPT. For example, if you're a manager or a leader, maybe some of your teammates like a lot of information and others like just the bullet points. And instead of alienating one or both of these folks, you can have AI be the editor and provide your team with both the TLDR or the short form, as well as the long form, depending on who it's for. And that way delight both these audience types and engage them both. This also comes into play if you're an executive who has to constantly get permission from your leadership team, or if you're on the C-suite of a company and you need to get board approval on things. And unless you're in the minority, whether it's a board meeting or an executive meeting, a lot of those are less fun than going to the dentist. And in my experience from leadership meetings as well as board meetings, there's 2 or 3 key things that tend to create bad meetings. One of them is that they are poorly facilitated. And the other one is that your team members rightfully bring different perspectives and also have different brain wirings that can be helpful, but also can hurt when you're trying to get everyone to collaborate together. In terms of facilitation, AI can give you facilitation tips and tricks. Also, check out the episodes we've done with folks like Janice Frazier, who I believe to be some of the foremost experts, and I go back and read her book and her work anytime I need to facilitate something really hard. Something else that I find when it comes to these meetings is sending out a pre-read. This can be sent out before the meeting, and the members are expected to read it before. Or you can give everyone 10 minutes as a start of the meeting, and it's totally worth that 10 minutes, depending on the type of room and how much misalignment you may have, so that they use that 10 minutes to read the document that you've prepared, get aligned on the context, know what priority problems need to be solved and what decisions need to be made. And AI can be very helpful with this too, in terms of generating a quality document. We'll also put a link to Amazon's template that we've talked about in some of the previous episodes that I find to be really useful in terms of the pre-read. The thing that I think AI can really help with these meetings is managing the different personalities and backgrounds. You could create a virtual board, for example. Some people like to think to talk. Others, like myself, like to talk to think. And I could very well be one of the board members in the meeting who comes in out of nowhere, doesn't have the context that I need. Sure, I'm trying to be helpful, but I end up derailing your meeting while trying to gather context, or worse, making assumptions and putting opinions forth. So go in there and tell ChatGPT that you're preparing for a board meeting. There are 3 board members, Susan, Janice, and Bob, for example, who'll be joining. And then write your best guess on each of their personalities and behaviors and help the AI form a persona on this digital twin of your board member. And ask it, in order to communicate with them separately and collectively, what else would the AI like to know about each of them? Ask it to interview you about the folks that you know about, and ask, ideally one by one. We'll get into a more detailed prompt, and it'll ask you questions that you may or may not have thought about them to be pretty relevant and form a fuller opinion. And then the next time you have one of these meetings, once you've prepared your talk track and your priorities and everything, ask the AI for advice on how to communicate and disseminate this information and what warning flags it may give you based on what it knows about your board members. It will likely tell you something like, make sure to mention ABC at the start of the meeting so board member Bob has what he needs and is less likely to disrupt the first 20 minutes. So these are things that you've seen happen, and this is something that shows the depth, and an intern AI can really help you with your talk tracks once you're able to give it enough context. We like to form opinions, consume information, and take action in different ways. And our brains are wired differently. Like I mentioned, some of us like to think to talk as introverts. Others like to talk to think like the extroverts. Some of us need bullet points, and that's plenty. Others don't find the bullet points to be sufficient and need more detail. GPT allows you to cater your information to your audience members and meet them where they are, so they're more likely to get aligned with your objectives and ultimately help you achieve your goals. Something else that AI helps me with personally as a leader and a manager is practicing with the non-deterministic aspect of the AI. In simpler terms, AI is somewhat unpredictable. You could ask it the same question twice, and while both answers may have generally similar ideas, it's going to give you different verbiage at minimum in those answers. And as someone who grew up as an engineer, I'll concede that I unfortunately developed a mental model that the world is more deterministic than it actually is, that there's more direct cause and effect to things. And of course, this isn't the case. And, I'll maybe use a little bit of a morbid, unfortunately, example to drive my point, where if we're trying to live a long and healthy life, we can eat healthy, we can exercise often, we can get enough sleep. But unfortunately, none of that really matters if we're unfortunately in a car accident. And what living a healthy lifestyle doesn't guarantee you a longer life, what it does is that it increases the probability of it, sometimes disproportionately, if you prioritize the right inputs or the levers. Similarly, what I found out the hard way as I grew up in my career is that humans are non-deterministic. It's hard to know how your coworker is going to react to something or how your customers respond to something. And I find that being clear and explicit in the request and being intentional in what we put out increases the probability of them responding the way that you hoped, even though it doesn't guarantee it, and sometimes may require iterating the request or the product. As I mentioned, this was really frustrating for me as I transitioned out of an engineering role where I was primarily writing code to working alongside colleagues and working closer with my customers. And I found that working with a non-deterministic AI has helped me control the things that are within my control, like being clear and specific in the ask, while also retraining me about a non-deterministic world. And I ultimately find myself asking better questions and also getting a lot less frustrated if I don't get a helpful or a response that I was hoping for. And instead of getting irritated and slowed down by that, I just move on, accept it quickly, and ask the next question to get closer there. So that's a little bit of an aside on how this practice is helping me even outside of the AI world. Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. Continuing on with ways that the AI intern helps me is with data and synthesis and analysis. Those of you following the show have probably gathered that I'm a bit of a spreadsheet nerd, to a point where I have gotten more than one coffee mug that says "freak in the sheets" as a gift. And either way, what I like to use the spreadsheets for are to gain insight on making a decision or translating data into meaningful insights based on things like correlations and trying to understand how to be doing things that lead to a higher probability of the outcome that you want, right? It often requires combining data from various sources that are formatted differently and then having to spend a lot of time getting the data ready to consume and then applying logic to this data or visualizations to find trends. And this can take a fair amount of work to do. Sometimes it's really helpful, and there's a golden nugget that helps myself, my team, our customers. And other times I've spent a lot of time not even knowing what I was searching for without ending up with any insights or anything that's actionable, and it feels like hugely wasted effort. With AI, it's a lot easier and way more likely to yield results. When I'm looking to understand a problem better, look for options amongst the solutions I have, or even experiment with the solutions, there are a few things that I find the AI intern helps me with a lot. The first one is that it helps me articulate and validate my idea and hunch. So ultimately, I end up focusing only on the ideas that may have more legs now that I have a better idea of what my idea was in the first place. And maybe that falls more in the expert consultant role that we'll talk about. But regardless, I'm going down the rabbit hole and investing my time on things that are more likely to be helpful and less on the others. And this is especially good for someone like myself who needs to talk out loud to crystallize my ideas. And speaking with AI often gives me this safe space to ramble ideas and prioritize the best ones and forces me to think through it in order to articulate it using my keyboard. And I work on the best ones rather than the first ones here. It's also really helpful in the work involved in making the spreadsheets. For example, if I have the data that comes in different formats for our business that I'm trying to analyze something between our accounting system, our timekeeping system that we use for invoicing, and our customer CRM. If you've used this kind of different data sources and done any Excel wrangling, you know how hard it can be to change the formats and transpose the data into a uniform way across the sources. And what AI allows you to do is upload a CSV file, give it a prompt on what you want transposed, and it'll do it for you. It may take a couple of tries, but it's saved me countless hours in terms of getting data to a way that I can compare and contrast it with other data sources. Once you've got it all into the same format, it also helps you review and analyze the data and find things that I may not have found myself. Once again, remember to stay in the driver's seat here. Think about your business and your strategy and ask it specific questions, and it's likely to give you better answers. Of course, you could also, I'm feeling lucky it and see if they are already correlations it can find. And you may get lucky there. For anything that I think is going to happen more than a one-time analysis, it also helps me write integrations between the source data into Google Sheets or Notion or Airtable. Sometimes I use Zapier, and it's helped me write the integrations in the way that I want. And I was able to do that without needing a software engineer from our integral team to drop in and help me with that. And I've been able to save that precious time of those folks for more complicated tasks here. So it helps you with ongoing data and updating these data sources too, using APIs. Now, previously, I would have just done way less analysis than I do now. And that means I would just rely on my instincts a lot more. Or even worse, I'd suffer in indecisiveness and inaction. Whereas now, using AI, it forces me to convert those instincts into thoughts, or ideally questions that I can validate or invalidate. And it helps me convert those questions into an analysis based on the data sources. As an aside, once you've gotten the data into a format like that, if you're looking for other correlations outside of data that is easily available in your business, there are tools like ReadySignal that will help find correlations to things like your leading indicators with external market factors that could be helpful with things like demand prediction and other things that can be very costly for you to maintain a big bench, for example, or big inventory otherwise. So remember, AI can be a super helpful intern. Just make sure to be thoughtful about the questions you ask it, be specific in terms of explaining the process you'd like it to follow. And like with all work that interns are done, make sure that there's checks and balances in place before you put it into production, whether it's a product, a spreadsheet, an article, or an email that is going out. Now let's switch to the other role that I find AI to be super helpful, which is the expert consultant. Now, whatever your role is, whether at work or at home, if you believe that a thought expert or a thought partner can help you, AI can be that, both with helping you brainstorm and articulating your own instincts and thoughts, as well as identifying other related information and non-obvious ideas that you may not have thought that is available on the internet today. Here's a prompt that I learned from a gentleman named Jeff Woods, who runs AIleadership.com. I highly recommend you go follow Jeff. It's spelled Geoff Woods at AIleadership.com. It's a prompting framework that he taught me, and it comprises of 4 components: context, role, interview, and task. And I think interviewing is the really important one that wasn't obvious to me, and kudos to you, Jeff. For example, I'll go through each of the 4. For context, you provide the AI with the current situation. Like, I'm a newly hired chief product officer at an automotive marketing company. My company has been in business for over 80 years, and they have established themselves as a leading supplier of automotive marketing research and publications. I have been hired to help drive digital revenue through new business models and new approaches to customer engagement and customer value delivery. The company has over 10,000 employees and have generally been quite traditional and conventional in their operations. There is now an ongoing digital transformation effort, which, however, feels wrought with friction amongst middle management. It is super critical for our company to provide modern solutions and offerings to our customers in order to stay relevant as a market leader, especially in the face of disruptive startups out of Silicon Valley that are gaining traction on our market share and are able to respond to customer demand much faster than our much larger company. We do have a global distribution channel and long-standing trusted relationships with folks in the market that is a benefit. While I bring a lot of experience as a product leader from my experience in the consumer internet companies, I currently feel quite challenged at driving outcomes like before because my company culture today is very different from my past companies like Meta and Netflix. So that's providing it context on what's going on right now. The next thing is the role and asking it to act like the expert that you want it to be. It can be a description or it can be a specific name. Like, I want you to act as a digital transformation expert with deep expertise in helping enterprises innovate and transform their customer offerings. You could also put something like, I want you to pretend to be Marty Kagan instead. And then the third step that I think is really important is the interview. Say, interview me, ask me questions one at a time, up to 3 to 5 questions to gain deeper context until you're ready to prepare the task. The last one is a task. Your task is to generate 5 non-obvious strategies to help me produce new digital revenue streams while navigating a traditional business. What's going to happen is ChatGPT will start asking you questions specific to your business, your customers, your market, or whatever else it needs to fill in the blanks on forming a good set of recommendations. And then it will provide you with what you've asked for in terms of what is likely non-obvious strategies. What I really love about this, number one, it forces me to state the problem in that context step. And this part's not always easy. It requires some level of editing as you start typing it out to get you to the root of what your problem really is. Like Einstein said, if he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. And I find that using AI as a thought partner like this really forces you with that 55 minutes of stating the problem really well and getting to the root of what you're solving for. And then the interview will add additional context to the problem. And I think this is especially valuable also when you're involving your entire team to help you with identifying and solving the problem. I'll concede that I've made this mistake more than once where I start delegating more in the doing phase, and I don't share enough context or invite enough feedback and collaboration during the thinking phase. And this can lead to a lot of downstream issues, let alone frustration on my team. And so some reminders on things that help communicate the problem better, whether it's to an AI or to your team, are questions like, who's the target audience? Who are we solving this for? What is the problem we're solving for them? How is it done today? What's the most important thing that our business is trying to solve today with respect to this solution? What is the most painful part for the customer? If you share these things that you know, I think it's really helpful. The second thing that I really like about this approach is that it doesn't just find what's available on the internet based on your prompt. You give it a chance to improve your own prompt and makes it a lot more catered to your specific circumstance. And it takes the guesswork out of how to prompt better by asking it to prompt you back. And so you get a much more catered answer versus a generic one that you then need to go out and customize again. The next thing, or the third thing I like about this is that it allows you to ask for a resource that you may not have available to you today. Whether it's a digital transformation expert or Marty Kagan, you can say, pretend like you're an expert from McKinsey or wherever. I highly recommend you try this out today. You can use it at work or at home for your relationship or for something you're trying as a parent, where it acts as a very trusted thought partner. It takes less than 10 minutes to go through this flow before it gives you its first set of recommendations. You can run it more than months. Like I mentioned, it's non-deterministic. And I guarantee you it's going to give you ideas that you hadn't previously thought of, which ultimately means there's more options for you to choose from. Another area that I like the AI thought partner is with speeches or presentations. And I still haven't seen many products out there, and I know they exist, that make really great slide decks. I just don't think they're the ones out there today are helpful. I find that AI does help a lot with refining my talk track. In most of the presentations I do, I like to have minimal verbiage on the slides themselves, and they're purely there as a visual aid or a prop for my talk track. And I end up spending a lot more effort and refining my talk track a lot more. And I learned a lot of this from an author that I have a lot of respect for, Carmine Gallo. And there's two of his books that I reread often. One of them is The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. Another one is called Talk Like TED. And what I love about both of these books is that they both are process and framework oriented and end up being very repeatable and teachable. And we ended up using a lot at Integral. Anytime I have a big presentation, even today, I get the book out and I go through the process and try to stay disciplined to it without skipping steps. More recently, though, I have trained ChatGPT on how to prompt me based on Carmine Gallo's frameworks, and ultimately help me with crafting a much better script for my talk with way less effort. Instead of my providing context here, what the AI is doing is holding me accountable to a process that I trust and I know brings the best results. So it ends up asking me a number of questions about my opinions and the data points and the takeaways I want on the talk and the audience. And then it helps me synthesize this into a script. Once I have a script that I like, it's really easy to put some slides together with images that are visual aids for the talk track. And this may be a personal preference, but I'm very careful about using AI generated images, specifically because some of them can be very distracting if it's obvious that they're AI generated. And so that's something I'd recommend you're being careful around, because ultimately you're trying to convey a point, not show that you know how to use AI. Another thing that it can do, whether it's for speeches or even emails, is you can train the AI on your voice. You can upload emails that you've written or scripts to speeches or presentations that you've done, and it can learn pretty quickly how to write like you rather than a generic automated voice. I personally find the AI tone of voice to be somewhat off-putting, and I know that others have shared the same feedback. And I find that training it in my voice requires less edits before I'm ready to hit send, because it learns how I like to speak and it sounds a lot more authentic. For example, you may have seen the word delve used a lot more in the past few years than years prior. And I think it's really a function of the fact that ChatGPT really prioritizes that word. So whether you're looking to work with AI with an intern or the AI expert consultant, I really like something else about it, that iteration is a lot faster and cheaper from many standpoints. Even amongst the best of company cultures and teammates that get along really well, there's always a cost of politeness that we don't have to pay with AI. Whether it's designing a business strategy and iterating on it, or a product roadmap that you need to prioritize, or even designing a tattoo, the cost of iteration, I believe, to be a lot lower. For example, this tattoo on my hand was designed by AI. Now, I've had the good fortune to work with some really great tattoo artists, and I find the best of them are good at two things at least. They're good at both the design and helping you craft the idea into a visual, and then they're good at the actual tattooing and the execution. And it's really hard to find people who are good at both. And on top of that, if you're hesitant about confrontation and feedback like myself, or upsetting someone who's about to put something very personal yet permanent on your body, that's another point of friction. It's very different with AI. When I designed this tattoo, I could give it feedback that was short, specific, super candid, and it rendered iterations within a matter of seconds until I got to something that I really loved and was ready to go to the next step. So I didn't have to find someone who's really good at understanding what I wanted and making it a design. I could just find someone who was a fine line expert at the execution. And again, I am in the driver's seat here. This is a super permanent decision. And I also had full agency to say no. I didn't have to use whatever AI came out with the first time if I didn't like it. I didn't copy and paste whatever the AI spat out. I sat with it. I iterated until I loved it. In my case, I even showed it to a few friends to get a little bit more feedback. And then I went back to the AI to add some more tweaks. And then I finally used a little bit of Photoshop for the last 10% to give myself the full control before I went to the tattoo artist. So hopefully that mindset of AI supporters, whether it's an AI expert or the AI intern, have been helpful for you. And you could choose which one to help based on whether you're making a plan and thinking and applying more judgment, or you're executing a plan and you're more concerned about the process and precision. We'll transition the conversation now to talk a little bit about what generative AI is and how to get started. What is it? We're going to put a link to a video by Andrej Karpathy, and he does a much better job of explaining it. But at a high level, the AI has studied examples like pictures, text, or even music that's available to the internet, and it learns patterns in them. And when you ask it to create something new, it uses what it's learned plus your prompt to generate a response that fits both of those in the pattern. Think about it like an autocomplete on your phone, but it's way more advanced. And best of all, you can use natural language to configure it further and learn more instead of being just ducking frustrated with the autocorrect, right? So what are the options that are available? There's a lot of companies that are getting a lot of funding to do AI research and building businesses around it. And what I'm about to say might be controversial, but if you're relatively new to it, if you don't use it every day, I would just start with OpenAI's ChatGPT and get comfortable with it before worrying too much about which tool to use. It's almost like a distraction in a form of thrashing. Some of the other ones I like to use are Claude AI, Perplexity. There are two Groks, GROQ and GROK. And between them, things are moving so fast that what I'm about to tell you is likely going to be obsolete by the time you're hearing it. So take this part with a grain of salt. It's just here to help get the ideas flowing for you. For me, ChatGPT is my overall powerhouse. It's the go-to. It's where I tend to get started on things. It has access to tremendously deep data sets as well as very powerful models. And so I'll oftentimes start there. I tend to like Claude's tone of voice better when it comes to writing, and I find it to be a much more relatable content editor than ChatGPT. So I'll often bring an almost finished piece of work into Claude, and I will ask Claude to help with the final edits on things like tone and language. I also know that Claude is very popular amongst software developers as an AI coding assistant. Another tool out there is Perplexity. It has a really powerful model, and I like it when I'm asking more obscure questions, as it tends to show me the sources and citations of information that it has combined into the response. So I find that the source data and the citation to be super helpful and gives me a lot of confidence around especially more nebulous questions I'm asking, where it avoids those hallucinations where an LLM makes up an answer and delivers it just as confidently as the answers that are accurate. That's something that I think is one of the primary concerns to be careful about when you're using information coming out of an LLM. Another service is Grok, G-R-O-Q. And Grok is a company that acts as essentially a cloud that hosts various AI models. They also have chips that are AI specific that makes the inference a lot faster and a lot cheaper. Check it out at grok.com and see how much faster it produces responses. They host open source models like Meta's Llama models, Mistral, and also DeepSeek, which is the model that shook the world in January of 2025 when DeepSeek came out of China as a much cheaper alternative to ChatGPT, and they've apparently used way fewer resources to get it to that level. Grok with a K, G-R-O-K, by X.AI is another platform whose version 3 model is gaining a lot of traction right now. This service is owned by the same parent company as Twitter or X. And so they have really real-time access to a lot of valuable data that people are putting on X. And I think this can be extremely valuable, especially for use cases that have a real-time component to them with the types of information that changes very quickly. Like, for example, if you're building a sentiment analysis tool about a specific brand, this tool can be super useful to inform things like stock trading decisions because of the real-time nature. Some of the other tools are Google's Gemini. I tend to use it mostly for things like Google Docs or Google Sheets because it's kind of built in and it integrates better. If you're more of a Microsoft shop, you will likely find the same way about Microsoft's Copilot, where you're having to switch between applications less if Copilot's able to do it from within Microsoft Word. All that being said, I don't want this list to overwhelm you or distract you away from getting started and going deep. If you're not using ChatGPT every day, start there until you find yourself naturally leaning towards an LLM to answer a question that you would have previously gone down a Google rabbit hole. Or worse, hopefully it saves you from sitting around a boardroom and debating opinions and slowing down your decision-making and your ability to take quick action because you're getting answers a lot faster that's rooted in data rather than opinion. How do you get started and form a habit around using and learning LLMs? For yourself, my advice is based on what helped me. When I decided that I wanted to get a lot more comfortable and learn more about LLMs when they first came out, I replaced my homepage from Google to ChatGPT. I also put the OpenAI mobile app in the spot where my web browser would be on my phone. And these little things really forced me to just ask ChatGPT the question first before then going to Google. The AI tools have gotten way better where I end up going to Google way less now. And it gave me a lot of real world experience and where it was useful and where it wasn't so useful. And it was really fast to find out. So don't stop if you don't get it right the first time. The second thing is something that the same gentleman, Jeff Woods, said, is to have a sticky note by your desk or on your screen and put a reminder there asking yourself, how can AI help solve this? And hopefully it's more likely to use AI. How do you get this rolled out on your team? Of course, you can approve the $20 or $30 for the paid versions of Copilot if your company doesn't have an enterprise version already. We also benefit at an Integral a lot from having an AI ML policy. This is really counterintuitive because we don't generally like policies. But we found that having a guideline or policy in place actually encouraged more folks to use it. And perhaps folks who weren't certain about the risks of using it or didn't necessarily know that it was a priority for a company felt both safe about using the tools as well as knew that they were acting in alignment with the company priority. This is also likely because we didn't publish a lot of policies and we had a philosophy that we didn't want our adult colleagues to be policed a lot through policy. So the fact that we published one likely signaled the priority, given how rare it was that we did it. The other thing around gaining adoption on your team that I like you to be careful or think about is focusing on the early adopters. These are the hand raisers. These are the folks who use it at home. These are the folks who tend to use it a lot more, even outside of work. Get them using it at work more and recruit them as internal influencers and have them spread the word to those more hesitant. It's going to be a lot more relatable because they're peers, and also there's going to be a lot more similar context around the type of work. That all being said, we should get to our third point around security and privacy. First of all, admittedly, this is not an area of expertise of mine. And the field is so fast emerging that there are definitely risks and it's a moving target here. Primarily, I'm worried about the security and privacy around the data that I upload into an LLM and whether it becomes accessible to anybody else. There's a cost of free. And you may have heard this adage that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And you've seen that with social media companies like X, Facebook, Instagram. They're using your data and your content and your context to drive more engagement and ultimately generate more revenue based on you giving it more attention. The generative AI companies are using the data you input and the prompts that you type in to further fine-tune and further train their models. So before you upload confidential files on there, make sure that you've read the fine print in your end user license agreement that you've agreed to, that we typically just click away quickly. And as you can guess, you can copy and paste that into an LLM and help you understand it and ask the LLM if this company is going to train on your data of what other security and privacy risks you'd want to be concerned about. If you're a larger company, maybe you have an enterprise version of OpenAI or Grok or whichever tool. And in those cases, it's likely spelled out very explicitly that they're unlikely that to train on your data, or that someone outside your company may see a response that's trained on the private information that's within your company. You can also look at Teams versions of these tools, like ChatGPT for Teams doesn't train their models on the data that you're uploading in there. It costs marginally more, but in my opinion, I think it's really worth it. You can also load versions of the open source models on your local laptop or your local device, and that might give you a little bit more peace of mind. There are still risks here, like our guest from last time, Mike Gayherd, mentioned. And there's also trade-offs on trying to run it on your laptop that's not meant to run an AI compared to an AI server. There's also other benefits besides security, like you're able to run them without having internet access on a flight or something maybe. Overall, I think the security and privacy is still fairly nebulous, and we're in the early innings of seeing the implications of it here. We're going to have a guest on who can talk about it more at an expert level. Just be careful uploading confidential business plans and other things that are super proprietary if you're not sure whether the model is going to train on your data or not. Other things that I've done are things like I've parsed confidential documents and uploaded specific parts rather than the whole document. And I've read through that specific part knowing that there's nothing super proprietary in there. Or I've used our clients' enterprise versions for their work instead of using the public ChatGPT, since we're a consultancy. Well, that's all the things that we have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this listen will encourage you to use LLMs more and also use it for helping you solve more complex and strategic problems as a thought partner. Remember that AI can help you as an expert consultant and also as a very dutiful intern. And in both cases, you need to continue staying in the driver's seat and having it work for you, don't work for it. Between ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, Gemini, Copilot, and the two Groks, you have a lot of options. So start small, where you're pushing the LLM deeper and deeper rather than worrying too much initially about switching between the different tools and distracting yourself that way. Replace your homepage from Google to ChatGPT and encourage yourself to ask AI before Googling the answer. Also watch the video that we're going to link by Karpathy there. Remember that there's still security and privacy risks here, and to check the version before you upload highly confidential information on there. And like always, start small, start now, start with yourself. Thank you so much for listening. As a reminder, these were topics that were compiled as a result of your feedback on the previous episode. So please keep those social messages and voice notes to our website, convergence.fm, coming. And until then, we will see you next week on our next podcast episode then. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.